Welcome back to another video. Back with Jam. I'm Kenny, and we're back this week to talk about a subject which I guess has a little to do with last week's subject, which was we were talking about practical effects this week. And we're not going to get too deep into it. I don't want to go too far back. I feel that if we go too far back into the what's it called, the history of like practical effects and special effects, we're gonna see some bad ones. It's not gonna be like some of the more current Marvel films or current movies where the CGI is bad, but CGI has been good for a bunch of years. Like I think we'll probably stick to like the 80s and 90s. I think maybe the early 2000s even for some practical effects because there was a lot of good stuff, especially in the 80s. I mean, there were some worse ones. A lot having to do, I think, with more low budget movies in that case. But let me ask you, like, if I asked you about a good practical effect in an old movie, what movie would you think of?
Off the
Yeah.
top, it just because it's kind of I go back and forth between as far as like one specific effect. Probably off the top would probably be the alien scene,
Yep. It's
the
exactly
chest
the one I
popping
was thinking of.
alien.
The chest burster.
Yeah, that I mean that's kind of like iconic, right?
Yeah.
I mentioned aliens, but I also think about American Werewolf in London.
Ooh,
Yeah, there's
that was a
that the
great transformation
transformation
scene.
scene.
Yeah, and there's other
That to me is
ones.
iconic. There's a bunch of them. There's a
Yeah.
bunch of them, and they're mostly in the 80s, 70s, 80s, in that kind of era. You think about like The Fly.
Oh, another great
The
one with
Fly
like
actually, The
uh,
Fly
a
around here.
a super involved transformation sequence, and you're right. I think like the budgetary action of it, well, the lack of any other technology was a big part of it. Because I mean, we had like, I guess these were like monsters of industry, like Tom Savini, who did like special effects, makeup for a bunch of movies, and he's actually I think
Yeah.
he's making an appearance in Terrifier 3. Hopefully he does the makeup as well. I'd love to see that. Besides Alien, like we can mention like Friday the 13th. Freddy Krueger had a pretty dope transformation scene, like when that girl's turning into a cockroach and her limbs are all coming off, and the
I
roach.
feel like just any of the horror films. I feel like back then it was like horror and sci-fi were really highlighting special
Dependent
effects,
on special
and then
effects.
modern day you have more of like the stunt work effect
Yeah.
that's still alive, and you'll still get like the terror. But I mean, you say it's. I don't know if it'll quite ever go away. I mean, there's still like an appreciation and a passion for it, and you got to incorporate it. I think like we talked about before. I think it's that mix, that perfect balance of the two, where you can have both the practical and kind of using the CG just to more shore up the scene to make it that much more realistic and not necessarily over like having that be the main thing. I think about if you think about a modern film, I think the one that pops out to hopefully in most people's minds is Fury Road and Mad Max, and
Yeah.
the kind of a work that they did with the special effects in the cars, and actually a lot of those cars, pretty much all those cars, being
Yeah.
actual built vehicles,
If
and
anything, the only
the
CG was
stunt
the
work.
environments around them and stuff.
It was like a lot of even the environment. It was like if the latest one, Furiosa, is probably more of an example of that, using the CG as an environment type of deal. And you can tell, like you can see it, and you can see the difference between Fury Road and Furiosa, as far as like what they did with the special effects. Fury Road was also notoriously like a difficult shoot, not just because of the personnel, but they were doing some pretty intricate stunts and some big stunts, and a lot of that is you got to get it right, and it's difficult to shoot that, and that costs money, and so the big stunt work and just using up the CG to kind of hide a lot of the cable work, cable wires and stuff like that. But a lot of that they were filming, I don't know where they were at, some kind of desert, and shooting these scenes, and little special effects here and there. Star Wars, we haven't even gotten into Star
Yeah.
Wars,
Dude,
and the appreciation that people have for the practical.
Yeah,
characters
that
and
that feels like a completely different type of practical effect as well, because the Star Wars, like when it was like models and matte paintings, layered images and stuff, which was, somebody had to sit down and paint all that. Can you imagine? And to make it look hyper realistic at the time
yeah.
by hand. So that goes to show like how good practical effects artists were as well, as part of their craft. Okay, so this is the scene in Freddy Krueger Nightmare on Elm Street 1, where she's asleep in her bed and she's having a nightmare, and we see the effect of Freddy sort of reaching through the wall. And this wasn't a practical effect. This was a practical effects. So basically, it was like a big rubber sheet that they sort of
Right.
stretched through and then came back through. And you see his head and you see a lot of the detail. It's not like completely detailed, but you do sort of see like where his face is supposed to be, where his hands are, and right here she looks up and he's gone, kind of feeling. So it's like that feeling of like
I'm
hyper
forever
realism.
traumatized of girls with crucifixes in bed at the Exorcist.
And then you compare that scene to the 2010 version where they use CGI to like recreate the same scene with him sort of coming through the wall, and they were able to do more because they were able to like really make it look like his shape. But at if you remember like looking at it, and it's like the lights were off, the coloring was off on the wall, you could really tell it was CG, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think in a case like that where the effect is like the draw to the scene, I think they should have stuck with practical effects. It would have at least made it feel a little more realistic, and it wouldn't really take you out of the whole situation you're in where these kids are dying. So I think that was like once where they actually didn't do that great of a job with the CG. Um, but I'm not gonna clown on them too hard because there are practical effects, that are horrible.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there's character costumes that look bad. There's, um, you've seen like in movies where characters get their arms cut off, and then you can totally tell that their arms just at their side, and then they attach a prosthetic limb on the side, and so it looks like they have two arms, and you can see the front arm come across the front, and yeah, I mean, depending on your budget, your stuff's not gonna look great, you know. There's that movie called Trolls where the
Classic.
practical effects of people melting was just having them lay down and pour green goop all over their body and be like, oh, they're melting, and there's bad ones. I'm not going to say that all practical effects were great, but it seems like practical effects have been a little better than a lot of CG effects, especially when the budgets are bigger. I kind of feels like there's no excuse for movies to have bad CG, especially with a good budget.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the main thing as to why there's the issue with that is they don't have the budget or they don't have the time. Probably time more than anything. When you have a movie that tries with the practical effects, specifically like a horror film, for example, and they just don't look good. I feel like those movies have a better chance of falling in that category where you almost want to. They're so bad, they're so good. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Where
I
you
love
want to
them.
watch them just
My
for
favorite
notoriously how
movies.
bad the effect was,
Yeah,
and versus a bad CG film. You're just I'm not trying to watch that, dude. Like it's just
yeah.
it almost feels like this
I
ain't worth the time.
I would rather have the fake arm across their chest and then a fake arm attached to their shoulder. I'd rather have that than a bad looking CG thing where it's like, dude,
Yeah,
you could have paid an actor $50 for the day and then attached a roll of toilet paper, put his shirt over it, and then been like, that's an arm, and the arm is missing. You can tell because there's nothing coming out of the sleeve. I feel sometimes too that CGI effects being used is overblown in cases like that where it's bad CGI. But nobody really talks about bad practical effects. You know, they just say, "Oh, it didn't look great." But I
Yeah.
think there's also like a scrutiny where it's not held to the same standard.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, they kind of give you that you can pull off a movie with bad practical effects and almost do it like, make it in a way where it's like, well, we kind of meant to do it like that, like it's that bad for a reason. But that it's almost more fun. I don't know, I'd rather watch a movie that just I know is going to have bad practical effects, and than a CGI film. And those are kind of actually fun to go back and watch. I know you mentioned Tom Savini here, but I was looking through it, and obviously Tom Savini is a big name, but uh, I'm also looking at Greg Nicotero. You know who's Greg Nicotero?
No.
Greg
What's an
Nicotero.
effect that he
So
did?
he's most known because he's like the main supervisor for Walking Dead and anything The Walking Dead does.
Ah,
But this guy's been around for a long, 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 long time, and supervising effects too for a
oh,
long, long, long time.
I looked him up. I know who this is. I've seen interviews with him before. I didn't know
Yeah,
he
he
was doing
did.
The Walking Dead.
So he started in Day of the Dead, but this guy's been doing. He does a lot of he does a lot of effects and supervising. I think for a lot of Tarantino films too. He doesn't just do horror films, but he's known for a lot of the horror stuff that he does. But he's been around for a long time, dude. And I'm looking at this guy's done anything from like uh Evil Dead 2, uh
Ooh, that's old.
Tales from the Dark Side, to like I said, Quentin Tarantino films, from
Dust Till
Dusk Till
Dawn,
Dawn.
Day of the Dead.
Yeah.
Dude, yeah, and these
Jingle
are
All the Way.
he did Jingle.
He did the apparently he did the suit. He was
Oh,
doing a lot
okay,
of stuff
okay.
with
He
the
designed
suit
the
and
suit.
then other effects too. But
All right, all right.
Jingle All the Way, Little Nicky. I remember Little Nicky having some
Little
good
Nicky had
practical
some
effects.
good effects as
The
well.
character designs.
Ooh, the character designs would have the what's it called? The boob head.
Yeah.
I hope he did that
Hey
one. I
man.
hope he did that practical
Hey
effect
man.
because that was a good one. You know, like
If I seen the man in front of me today, I'd have a few questions. 100%. That's another one. Like, and you look at it. I mean, he recently worked on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and that one actually had
oh,
pretty
that one
good
had really good effects
practical
at the
effects.
end.
Yeah, at the end.
That fight scene that had some really good effects. Like, what's another big scene that was like um, done with practical effects?
With practical effects.
Yeah.
It's weird because when you ask me that, I mostly think of the like classic, like I said, like classic horror
Yeah.
films, and those kinds of scenes. I mean, recently, what pops to mind is either stunt work in Mad Max or the Terrifier films and some
Yeah.
of the effects from
The,
there.
the
And the
Terrifier did.
Terrifier films
Yeah.
almost does it in a way where that guy's holding it down, man. I forgot that director's name. Forgive me, but that guy, he's bringing it back. He's bringing it back into the horror realm, and those practical effects kick ass, man. They're almost like they almost shoot the scene in a way where you're just uncomfortable. It's just kind
Damien
of
Leone.
Damien Leone.
Yeah,
That's
I think too, practical effects lends itself to that because the movie's almost 7 years old at this point, so I'm not 8 years old at this point. I'm not gonna nitpick, but like there's this scene, uh, where he's beating somebody up and he's just like pounding on the corpse.
on the face, right?
Yeah,
It's
and
just
then
like
you see
breaking
like
face in.
it's a practical effect. It's a dummy, and as he's hitting it, you see the pieces falling off, and
Yeah.
that lends itself to the whole realness of it. And you could do that with CGI, but again, like unless you're really good at CGI, I think that it's hard to like. And this I'm talking about, like when I was doing animation and stuff, or learning animation. It's like things have weight to them. You know what I mean? things have
Yeah.
weight, and if you don't know how to make things in CGI look like they have weight, it's not gonna look good. It's not. It's not. And another comparison scene that I would talk about. Well, why don't you try to take a guess? It's an older movie.
It's an older movie and
Yeah.
like a notorious CGI.
No,
Can you
no,
give me?
it's a practical effect.
Okay, or my bad. Yeah, like is this supposed to be like considered one of the, like a good practical effect or
It's a
bad?
great practical effect from
Okay.
a great movie.
I would
I think you
lean.
mentioned it earlier.
Did you go? Did you go horror?
Yeah,
Are you talking about horror?
yeah.
Uh, I probably talked
Because
about.
they
I don't know.
redid the scene recently in the movie, and it wasn't Freddy Krueger.
I'm gonna say the exploding head and scanners.
Oh, I forgot about the exploding head and scanners. We'll talk about that one in a minute. But I was talking about The Shining. You had mentioned it
Yeah.
earlier.
Oh yeah, the blood hallway.
The blood
blood
elevator
bath.
scene. That one was done really well. And I don't know if you remember in Ready Player One,
Yeah,
they had the blood elevator scene,
yeah, they had that scene.
and yeah, give me a second.
I understand why Ready Player One had to have CGI. I mean, it's all taking place in a virtual world.
Yeah. All right. So we'll watch the Shining scene. It's like 30 seconds, so it shouldn't take too long. But I mean, like, the hallway's supposed to set like this feeling, right? And then you hear the ding, and you see the blood start pouring out, and it's like moving the elevator doors, and she's like watching it,
She was
and
great.
she's really selling it. She's really selling
Yeah,
it.
she was great.
Yeah.
100%.
I feel bad for what they made her go through.
Oh,
But
don't even-
but
yeah.
you know, you saw the blood come out, and then they redid it in Ready Player One when they're looking for the I guess the first key, and one of the characters, I forgot the name of the character, they see the two little girls, and then they hit the elevator, and if I remember correctly, they're afraid of horror movies, so they've never seen The Shining, and
that character. I
yeah.
think that character was. I forgot her character's name, but
I think they go by G. They don't go by their full name. But even then, like, it looked pretty good.
it looks pretty good to me.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
I feel like water is kind of not as tricky, or like liquid is not as tricky. They got that down pretty good nowadays.
yeah,
This is legit though.
yeah. With the actual red food dye water, that
Yeah.
was like, holy crap.
Can you imagine? Honestly, acting wise, it probably makes it a lot easier too, because you see, her shock and horror. I want to say the alien scene, the chest scene. I think there was something to that where they had like an element of surprise for the actors, so that they could get more genuine reactions as to how that and that's happened a few times. I know where you have these infamous scenes where, not infamous, but like iconic scenes where they don't really tell them what's going to happen and how it's exactly going to happen. So when they get the reaction, that it's more genuine. And I want to say that was one of them as well, the alien scene, the chest popping scene. But Scanners, the classic.
We'll end it with Scanners, and here you see, like, it's at the end of the movie. They sort of sit down to like a news conference, and he's talking, and like the whole time, this is where the actors sort of help sell it, because he's reacting. He's like moving and flinching, and like there's something wrong. So it really
Yeah.
helps sell the effect, you know. And then as we get closer, they're just sitting there, and it's getting worse and worse.
That's what he.
You know, and then boom, like, it's camera work too, because like they show very little of the mannequin right before it explodes.
It's just right away, boom,
Yeah,
and then right into the explosion. It was well done, man. You had the creativity was on par. Dude, I can talk on and on about, like, we could just literally go down a list of just horror practical effects and talk for a good hour on that. Leprechaun.
we should do a
Chucky,
live.
like,
We should do a live stream, a video, and then just watch the practical effect scene and
the
then
best
rank them.
practical effect.
But thank
I
you
mean-
guys again for joining us this week. So hope you had fun. We'll be back with another video next week. But I'm Kenny. That's. Oh, we didn't do it.
Yeah.
There you go. And we're Jam and Kenny. Thank you guys again for watching. You guys have a good weekend. Leave you with peace.